The leaves were still on my coat when I reached the front door. October had come in cold that year, and my Tuesday walk had taken me past the old Miller farm, where the maples had turned the color of fire. I had my groceries in one hand, my keys in the other. The same keys I had carried for 34 years. I slid the key into the lock. It didn't turn. I tried again. Slower this time. Nothing. The key just sat there, useless, like it belonged to a different life. That's when I saw it. A brand new brass lock. Still shiny. Not a single scratch on it. Someone had put it there while I was walking past the maples. My phone buzzed. Mom, don't panic. I did this for your own good. You're too old to live alone. We're moving in this weekend. It's already decided. I read it twice, then I set the grocery bag down at my feet. This was the house where I brought my babies home. The house where Thomas took his last breath in the bedroom down the hall. My name was on the deed, had been for 34 years. I did not call Derek back. I did not cry. I just stood there looking at that shiny new lock, and something very old and very decided woke up inside me. To understand why that moment didn't break me, you need to understand who I am, and more importantly, who I had spent a lifetime being for everyone else. My name is Margaret Calloway. I am 71 years old. I spent 38 years as a registered nurse in cardiac care. Night shifts mostly. The kind of work that asks everything from you and thanks you quietly. If at all. I raised 2 children between those shifts. I budgeted grocery money down to the last dollar. I held the hands of strangers as they left this world, and then I drove home and packed school lunches. Thomas passed 6 years ago. A stroke. Quick, the doctor said, as if that was a comfort. I have never once described myself as a victim. That word has never fit the shape of my life, but I did hold one belief. For 70 years, I held it without question. Family is the one place where you are always safe. I was wrong. Learning that truth cost me everything I thought I knew about my son. What he was capable of, what he had already planned. But before I tell you what Derek did, I need to tell you about Thomas. Because without Thomas, there is no house. And without the house, there is no story. Thomas Calloway was a high school history teacher. Quiet man. Steady as a fence post in hard ground. He never raised his voice in 31 years of marriage. Not once. And he had a way of looking at ordinary things like they mattered enormously. We bought the house on Briar Ridge Lane in the spring of 1987. It was not much to look at. Peeling shutters the color of old mustard. A basement that collected water every time it rained. A backyard that was more crabgrass than anything else. The realtor called it a fixer-upper. Thomas called it perfect. I remember standing in the empty living room the day we got the keys. The walls were bare, the floors were scuffed. It smelled like dust and someone else's history. Thomas walked to the far wall, pressed his palm flat against the plaster, and turned to look at me. "Maggie," he said, "this is where we grow old together, right here." I believed him completely. We spent the first summer pulling that house apart and putting it back together. Thomas on a ladder every weekend, scraping and painting. I learned to patch drywall. We ate sandwiches on the floor because we hadn't moved the furniture in yet. And we laughed about things I can't even remember now, only that we laughed. The sawdust smell stayed in the house for months. To this day, when I catch that smell somewhere, I think of Thomas on that ladder. Every spring, without fail, he repainted the shutters forest green. Said it kept the house looking alive. We paid for it the hard way. 30 years of mortgage payments. Thomas tutored students on Saturday mornings for extra money. I picked up extra shifts in the ICU whenever they came available. There were years when we chose the house over vacations, over new cars, over things other families took for granted. We never once regretted it. 3 months after we made the final mortgage payment, Thomas was gone. A stroke on a Tuesday morning while he was reading at the kitchen table. The coffee was still warm when the ambulance came. The night after his funeral, I sat alone in our bedroom. The house was full of casserole dishes people had brought, and quiet voices from the other room. I got up and walked to the wall. The same wall he had pressed his hand to in 1987. I put my palm flat against the plaster, the way he had done. "I'll keep it, Thomas," I said. "I'll keep all of it." In the weeks that followed, I did what any careful nurse would do. I contacted our estate attorney. I had the deed transferred fully into my name. I updated my will. I gathered every document, the deed, the mortgage records, Thomas's death certificate, the insurance papers, and I organized them in a fireproof lockbox that I kept beneath the bed. Not because I suspected anything, because I had spent 38 years in medicine, and I knew that being prepared was not paranoia. It was simply wisdom. I imagined grandchildren running down that hallway at Christmas. I imagined the smell of good food filling every room on holidays. I imagined Thomas's memory living quietly in the walls, the way it already did for me. I believed this house would hold my family together. And for a while, for one shining golden while, it was exactly that. Thanksgiving 2021 was the most perfect day that house ever held. Derek and Connie came with the boys. Susan drove up from Nashville with her husband Ray. By 10 in the morning, every light in the house was on, and someone had taken over my kitchen in the best possible way. The turkey had been in since dawn. The sage stuffing was in the big ceramic dish. Thomas's mother had left us, the one with the chip on the rim that I could never bring myself to throw away. Football came from the den. The boys argued cheerfully about something I didn't follow. Susan was at the counter chopping celery and telling a story about her neighbor's dog, and Connie was laughing before she even got to the end of it. My grandson Tyler, Derek's oldest, 16 that year, set the table without anyone asking him. Every fork in the right place. I stood in the kitchen doorway and watched him do it and felt something so full it almost hurt. Derek was at the counter with a dish towel over his shoulder, telling a story about something that had gone wrong at work. He told it so well that we were all laughing until our eyes watered. Ray had to set his drink down. Even Connie, who had heard it before, was wiping her face. Later, after dinner, Derek and I stood together at the kitchen window. The boys were in the backyard, throwing a football in the last of the evening light. Derek put his arm around my shoulders the way he used to when he was young. "Mom," he said, "this house is magic. I mean it. There's nowhere else like it." I squeezed his hand. "Your father built it that way." Thomas's photograph was on the mantel in the living room, the one from our 25th anniversary. That evening it seemed less like a photograph and more like a presence. Like he was simply in the next room. After everyone left, I stood in the kitchen doorway. Dishes done. House quiet. Every chair pushed back in. I had never felt less alone in my life. Looking back, I wish I could have frozen time right there in that doorway, because that was the last Thanksgiving I spent in my own home as its true and undisputed owner. The changes came slowly at first. The way a tide comes in. So gradual you don't notice until the water is already at your knees. Derek started calling every Sunday. In March of 2022. At first I looked forward to it. A son who calls his mother every week. What is there to complain about? We would talk for 20 minutes, sometimes 30. He asked about my garden. He asked about my neighbor Helen. It felt for a little while like something was being repaired between us that I hadn't known was broken, but I noticed a pattern. Every call contained one comment. Just one, slipped in gently, near the end. "Mom, that yard is a lot for one person. Are you keeping up with the gutters because those gutters are no joke? You really should have someone look at the furnace before winter." He offered to take over the seasonal maintenance. The gutters, the yard, the small repairs Thomas used to handle. I said yes. I was relieved even. I told myself this was what good sons did. They stepped up, they helped. I didn't see it then for what it was. He wasn't inserting himself as my helper. He was inserting himself as the house's caretaker. There is a difference, a significant one. But I wasn't looking for differences yet. I was just grateful for the calls. That was the first brick. I didn't feel it being laid. By August, Derek and Connie were coming on weekends regularly, sometimes with the boys, sometimes alone. I welcomed it. The house felt less quiet. I made coffee and left them to their projects and told myself this was family working the way family was supposed to work. One Saturday, I walked over to Helen's house for the afternoon. When I came back, I went down the hall to Thomas's old study to get a book. I stopped in the doorway. The walls were gray. A flat, cold gray that seemed to pull the light out of the room. Thomas's bookshelves, the ones he had built himself from plans he'd drawn on graph paper, were gone. stacked in the garage, I found out later. The sage green he had chosen, the green he had rolled onto those walls on a rainy Sunday in 1991, was completely gone. Derek was in the kitchen when I came back down. It was looking tired, Mom. We thought a refresh would be nice. I stood there. I looked at him. I felt something hollow open up in my chest, the way a room feels when the furniture has been cleared out. I said nothing. I told myself the room had needed updating. I told myself he was trying to help. I told myself Thomas wouldn't have minded. But Thomas had chosen that green himself. He had held 3 paint chips up to the window light and chosen it deliberately. And nobody had asked me. Not a phone call, not a text, nothing. I put it away. I got very good at putting things away. In January of 2023, Derek came for dinner. Pot roast, his favorite since childhood. We were at the table when he mentioned, in the same casual tone he might use to discuss the weather, that he had been looking into adding a bedroom suite on the main floor. For you, Mom, so you don't have to manage the stairs. I set my fork down. I looked at him directly. Derek, I am not an invalid. I walk up those stairs every single day without any difficulty whatsoever. He glanced at Connie. It was a fast glance, barely a second, but I saw it. I had spent 38 years reading people in crisis. I knew what it meant when 2 people communicated without words across a table. He smiled at me. Patient. Practiced. We're just thinking ahead, Mom. You don't have to worry about the details. I brought it up again the following week by phone. I was calm. I was clear. I said I did not want structural changes made to my home without my input and my approval. He talked over me, cheerfully, changed the subject to something about Tyler's basketball. Ended the call warmly. The way you end a call with someone whose concerns you have already decided don't require a response. I didn't raise it again. I told myself he meant well. I told myself he was a worrier, the way his father had been a worrier. But the truth I could not yet say out loud, was that he had stopped hearing me as the owner of the house. He had started hearing me as something to be managed within it. April brought something worse. Derek came on a Wednesday, which was unusual. He had a printed document in a manila folder. He set it on my kitchen table like it was a normal thing to do, and he explained, carefully and reasonably, that since he and Connie had been investing so much time in the property, it would make practical sense to add his name to the utility accounts, for bill management. For simplicity, he had already called the electric company, he mentioned. As a courtesy, I felt something cold move through me. Don't panic. Something quieter and more serious than panic. Derek, I said, whose name is on the deed to this house? He waved his hand. That's not what this is about, Mom. This is just practical. I did not sign the document. After he left, I went through every file, every account, every statement I could find. I discovered that 2 utility accounts had already been moved to a joint name I had not authorized. I called both companies the next morning and began the process of correcting it. I did not call Derek. I told myself he had overstepped but hadn't meant harm. But something in me, the part trained to monitor vital signs, to catch the moment a patient begins to decline, was no longer willing to be reassured. That part of me had started keeping notes. September arrived warm and golden. Derek organized a barbecue at my house. My house. He set the date, sent the invitations, and arranged the food. He told me about it 4 days beforehand. There were 11 people on that patio. Neighbors of his I had met once or twice, Connie's sister. Gary from down the street. I was talking with Gary when I mentioned that I was still thinking about whether to update the kitchen cabinets. It was a small thing, an ordinary thing, a homeowner says. Derek laughed. Loud enough for the whole patio to hear. Mom, let's be honest. You're not exactly in a position to be making major decisions about the property at this point. We're going to handle all of that. The patio went quiet the way a room goes quiet when something has been said that cannot be unsaid. I saw Connie smile into her drink. I saw Gary look away toward the yard. I heard Derek continue talking, moving on, as though he had said nothing worth pausing for. I smiled. I excused myself. I walked into the kitchen and stood at Thomas's sink and gripped the edge of the counter and stared out at the yard where my grandchildren were playing in the last of the September sun. And for the first time, I did not reach for a charitable explanation. I did not tell myself he meant well. I did not put it away. I simply stood there and let myself see it clearly, all of it. The Sunday calls, the gray walls, the dismissal at the dinner table, the utility accounts. And now this, he was not worried about me. He was repositioning me. I dried my hands on the dish towel. I walked back outside. I smiled at Gary. I ate my food. I said nothing. But something inside me, something that had been patient for a very long time and was now completely finished with being patient, had made its decision. And then, 6 weeks later, I came home from my Tuesday morning walk and found a shiny new lock on my front door. I read the text again, slowly, the second time. Mom, don't panic. I did this for your own good. You're too old to live alone. We're moving in this weekend. It's already decided. Already decided. I stood on my own front porch and read those 2 words until they stopped feeling like language and started feeling like something else entirely. I picked up the grocery bag. I walked around to the back of the house. New locks there, too. Same brass, same shine. I stood in the backyard for a moment. The oak tree Thomas had planted the year Derek was born was dropping its leaves in the October wind. I watched one fall. Then I walked to Helen's house. She opened the door before I knocked. She had seen me coming up the path. Maggie, she said. The way she said it told me she already knew something. She had seen a locksmith's van that morning. Derek's car in the driveway. Connie inside the house with a tape measure, moving room to room along the living room windows. Helen had watched from her kitchen window, uncertain whether to call me. She hadn't wanted to worry me over nothing. It wasn't nothing. I sat down at Helen's kitchen table. My hands were trembling, but they were deliberate. There is a difference between trembling with fear and trembling with focus. I have felt both. This was the second one. I called Derek. He answered on the second ring. Quickly, eagerly almost. Like a man who had been sitting by the phone, he spoke first. Calmly, reasonably, in the tone he had been using with me for the better part of 2 years. He and Connie had made a decision. The house was too large for one person. He had been in contact with a real estate attorney, his attorney, and they had begun discussing what he called formalizing the transition of the property. Given my age, he said, given my diminished capacity for self-care, diminished capacity, he used those words about his own mother. I let him finish. I did not interrupt. I did not raise my voice. When the line went quiet, I asked him one question. Derek, did you speak to my doctor? A pause. Well, no, but did you consult my attorney? Mom, I don't think that's really, did you read the deed to this property recently, Derek? Silence. The specific silence of a man who has not considered that he might have miscalculated. I told him I would be in touch. I ended the call. I placed the phone face down on Helen's table. The kitchen smelled like coffee and the cinnamon candle she kept on the windowsill. Sunlight came through the curtains in long, quiet stripes across the floor. I sat with my hands folded. And I felt, for the first time in 18 months, completely clear. There was nothing left to rationalize, nothing left to reframe as concern or helpfulness, or a son who simply worried too much. He had changed the locks on my house. He had called me diminished. He had hired an attorney to take what belonged to me. And he had done all of it believing I was too old, too soft, and too tired to do anything about it. He thought age had made me soft. He had forgotten what 38 years in cardiac care teaches a woman. It teaches her to stay calm when the situation is critical. And this was critical. I asked Helen to drive me home, not to the front door, to the back gate, the wooden one along the side fence that opens to the garage. Derek had changed 2 locks. He had forgotten about the gate. In 34 years, that gate had never had a lock on it. Thomas always said a garden gate should open freely. It opened freely now. I went in through the garage, through the side door, and up the stairs, to my bedroom. I moved to the far side of the bed. I pressed back the corner of the rug and lifted the short floorboard panel beneath it, a detail I had never mentioned to Derek. To anyone, really, except Thomas. The lockbox was exactly where it had always been. I carried it out to Helen's car and we drove back to her kitchen. I spread everything on her table. The original deed, my name and my name only, in clear black type. Thomas's death certificate. My updated will, Patricia Wren's card, the estate attorney who had helped me transfer the deed 6 years ago, my financial account documents, and the handwritten record I had been keeping since April. Dates, conversations, the utility account changes, the afternoon on the patio when 11 people heard my son tell me I was not capable of making decisions about my own home. I called Patricia Wren's office first. Her assistant put me on hold for less than 2 minutes. I had an appointment for 9 the following morning. I called my bank. I spoke to a supervisor and placed a verbal flag on every account. Then I called a locksmith, my own. By 4 o'clock that afternoon, the back door had a new lock, my key, my lock, my door. I did not call Derek. I did not send a text. I packed the documents back into the lockbox and set it beside the guest bed where I would sleep that night. I sat on the edge of the bed for a moment in the early evening light coming through Helen's curtains. Quiet. Still. Ready. The next morning, I put on my good navy blazer, the one I wore to Thomas's service, and I drove myself to Patricia Wren's office. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was preparing. Patricia Wren's office was on the second floor of a brick building on Clement Street, up a flight of stairs that smelled like old wood and radiator heat. Her assistant showed me at 9:05. Patricia was mid-50s, silver hair pulled back without fuss, a desk organized the way a serious person organizes things, by priority, not by appearance. She wore reading glasses on a thin chain. When I sat down, she took those glasses off and looked at me directly, not with pity. With attention, I laid everything on her desk. The deed, the handwritten record, the utility account documentation, the screenshot of Derek's text. She read carefully. She asked 4 questions. When did he first add his name to the accounts? Whether I had anything in writing about the proposed bedroom addition. Whether Derek had mentioned his attorney by name. Whether I had received anything from that attorney directly. I answered each one. She folded her hands. Mrs. Calloway, what your son has done constitutes unlawful lockout of a property owner. Depending on his next steps, it could escalate to attempted elder financial abuse under Ohio statute. You have an airtight case. What would you like to do? I set my hands flat on her desk. I want my house back, and I want him to understand, legally and permanently, that it is mine. She nodded once. She picked up her pen. Patricia drafted the cease and desist letter that same morning. It cited the unlawful lockout by date and time. It cited the unauthorized utility account changes by account number. It cited Derek's own words, his stated intention to formalize the transition of the property. And Patricia noted, with the particular satisfaction of a woman who had seen this before, that his phrasing was legally significant. Self-incriminating was the word she used. While she worked, I called a locksmith from her office. Full rekey of every lock. Thursday morning, 8 o'clock. That afternoon, I contacted both utility companies with Patricia's legal documentation and finalized the restoration of sole account status in my name. I updated my estate documents with a new clause Patricia had drafted specifically for my situation. Any future claim of diminished capacity would require written assessments from 2 independent physicians and a certified geriatric evaluation. It would not be a phone call and a locksmith. It would not be easy. It would not happen again. Then I called my bank. I removed Derek as my emergency contact. I replaced him with Susan. I drove home that evening and slept in my own bed. My key on the nightstand beside me. Thursday morning, the locksmith arrived at 8. He was thorough and unhurried and finished in 45 minutes. I made coffee while he worked and watched the October light move across Thomas's kitchen floor. At 10:17, a certified letter was delivered to Derek's address. Signed for by Connie. At 10:43, my phone lit up. Derek's name, I watched it ring. At 11:05, he called again. Then a text. Mom, what is this letter? Call me right now. Then, minutes later, a message to Connie that Connie in her panic forwarded to Susan by mistake. She got a lawyer? Susan called me laughing and crying at the same time, the way she used to as a little girl when something was both funny and overwhelming. Mom, she said, did you just lawyer up on Derek? I was standing in my kitchen, my key in my hand. Fresh locks on every door. I simply reminded him whose name is on the deed, sweetheart. The next 48 hours were not quiet. Derek called 11 times. He sent 17 text messages. I know the exact numbers because I counted them for Patricia's records. The messages moved through confusion, then frustration, then something that dressed itself up as concern but had the posture of anger. Connie sent a long message. It began with, "I want you to know this was never about the money," and ended with a plea to keep things between family. I read it once and set the phone down. Tyler sent one message, short, no explanations, no justifications, just, "Grandma, I didn't know he was going to do that. I'm really sorry." I wrote back to Tyler. Only Tyler. Saturday morning, Derek came to the door. I had heard his car in the driveway. I had time to prepare, though I didn't need much. I had been preparing since Tuesday. I opened the door, my lock, my key that had opened it. He looked like a man who had not slept. He looked, beneath the sleeplessness, like something I recognized from a long time ago, like my son. I stepped aside. "Come in," I said. "We'll talk in the kitchen." I made tea. The table held 2 cups and 1 document. The original deed, face up, my name in the same clear black type it had carried for 34 years. Derek sat. He looked at the deed and then looked away from it. He talked for several minutes. The stairs, my age, the maintenance, how much they worried, how they had only wanted to help, had only been trying to think ahead, had only meant well. He used the word only many times. I let him finish. Then I placed one finger on the deed. "Derek, I want you to read the name on this document." He looked down. "I carried this house for 34 years, I said. "I made every payment after your father died, everyone. I kept every record, every receipt, every legal document in a fireproof box beneath my bedroom floor, because I am a woman who has always been prepared. Not because I'm old, because I am thorough." I paused. "Let that sit. You are my son. I love you. But you will never make another decision about this property without my written, witnessed, and legally documented consent. And if you attempt again, Patricia Wren will be my next phone call, not my first." The kitchen was very quiet. Derek looked at the deed for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost something. All the practiced patience, all the careful reasonableness. What was left was smaller and younger and more honest. "I thought I was protecting you, Mom." I looked at him steadily. "I know," I said, "but I never needed protection from my own home." I poured his tea. We sat together at the table where I had made his lunches as a boy, where Thomas had read his newspaper every morning for 30 years, where I had spread my documents 4 days ago and seen everything clearly. The conversation continued. But the power in that room had shifted. Permanently, irreversibly. That was 14 months ago. A great deal has changed since then, and so have I. 14 months later, the house on Briar Ridge Lane is still mine. It feels different now, not smaller, not lonelier. Cleaner, somehow. More fully itself, more fully mine. As though something that had been slowly clouding the air inside these walls has finally lifted, and I can breathe in every room again without bracing for something. Thomas's study is painted warm cream, not the sage green Derek erased, not the cold gray he replaced it with. Something new, something I chose myself on a Saturday afternoon in April, when Susan drove up from Nashville, and we stood in the hardware store for 40 minutes, holding paint chips up to the fluorescent light, and arguing cheerfully and laughing at nothing in particular. We painted it together, the two of us, with the windows open and the radio on. It took all day. It was one of the best days I can remember. My Tuesday walks have continued without interruption. I started a small garden along the back fence in the spring. Tomatoes, herbs, one optimistic rose bush that has exceeded all expectations. On Thursday mornings, I go to a watercolor class at the community center. I am not talented. I go anyway. There is a particular freedom in doing something purely for the pleasure of it, with no one to answer to and nothing to prove. 6 months after the morning at the kitchen table, Derek came to the door on a Sunday. Alone. No Connie, no prepared speech. He was holding a peace lily in a clay pot. Thomas's favorite plant. I don't know if he remembered that, or looked it up, or simply got lucky. It doesn't matter. He didn't try to explain. He just stood there on the porch and said, "I'd like to try to do better, Mom, if you'll let me." I let him in. We are not where we were. We may never be. But we are building something new, carefully, on ground that is honest. That is enough. Some repairs take time. I am a patient woman. Some evenings I stand at the kitchen window, the one that looks out over the backyard, and I put my hand flat against the wall beside it. The same wall, the same plaster beneath my palm. I don't say it out loud. I don't need to. But I say it to him quietly, the way you speak to someone who already knows. I kept it, Thomas. I kept all of it. Loving your children should never require surrendering your name from your own front door. Age is not a diagnosis. And I refuse to let anyone treat it like one. A home is not just walls and a deed. It is the accumulated proof that your life happened and mattered. I spent 38 years keeping other people alive. It turned out the most important person I ever needed to fight for was myself. The greatest deed a woman can hold isn't the one in the lockbox. It's the one that says, in her own handwriting, in her own life, I did not let them erase me.